Some stories aren't told in memoirs or glossy interviews. They live in cold rooms, typed in measured language, sealed behind manila folders stamped with words like toxicology, cause, and undetermined. When those folders surface, whispered about, argued over, reread years later, the legends we thought we understood become human again. Tonight we're opening a different kind of Hollywood history. 15 names, 7 rapid chapters, and a set of revelations that push past the posters and the fanfare. You'll hear the cases that won't stop echoing, the habits that outlived the roles, the silent illnesses that stole whole futures, and the mistakes that still make people angry. We'll move quickly, and we won't repeat ourselves. If a detail adds nothing new, it's gone. Ready? Let's open the files. Marilyn Monroe's ending has been rewritten more times than any script she ever held. The official language referenced a lethal mix of barbiturates. The timeline and the scene kept feeding a rumor mill that never went quiet. People fixate on the coroner's phrasing, on the absence of pill fragments in her stomach, on who was nearby and who wasn't, on missing phone calls and a supposedly too-perfect bedroom tableau. Over decades, those gaps got paved over with speculation, political, personal, and everything in between. But strip the noise and you're left with a woman living under crushing attention and spiraling health, a person who had begun to feel like a public property rather than a human being. The file is clinical. The fascination remains emotional. And that's why this story won't close. It's less about one night than the weight of 1,000 days that came before it. Natalie Wood's case is the one that still makes seasoned investigators choose their words like they're diffusing a fuse. Late November, a dark stretch of water off Catalina, a yacht, a handful of people, and a sequence of events that refuses to lock into place. The first ruling used the word accident. Years later, after new statements and a closer look at bruising patterns, that tidy label was replaced by something more complicated. Undetermined factors doesn't satisfy anyone, but it's honest about uncertainty. Was it anger, confusion, a disastrous slip on a slick deck in the wrong shoes at the wrong time? The people who loved her all have versions of the night they can live with. None of them feel like the full answer. When fans talk about Natalie now, they always add a quiet line. She was afraid of the water. You don't need to buy every theory to understand why that sentence lands like a stone. But not every tragedy needs a shadowy plot. Some happen in broad daylight, under open sky, with a sound you never forget. James Dean's final minutes have been photographed in memory so many times that the facts are sometimes the last thing people remember. A young man, a road built for speed, a small, impossibly fast car, and a collision that ended everything at 24. The autopsy read like it was written by gravity itself. Broken neck, catastrophic trauma, injuries with no poetry in them at all. What keeps Dean evergreen isn't a conspiracy. It's the way the record ignores the legend. The page doesn't care about charisma. It simply lists the cost of a fierce, rebellious life that took a road too straight into a future he never saw. Steve McQueen's last chapter was quieter, but somehow braver. Mesothelioma is a cruel slow burn, often linked to exposure most people don't even know they had. By the time he sought a last-ditch operation across the border, he'd already heard versions of the word no from too many doctors. He chose hope anyway. That choice took him into an improvised operating room and a procedure his body couldn't survive. People argue over whether he should have tried it at all. But when you look at that single decision, a man defined by motion, refusing to sit still while the clock ran down, you see a different kind of daredevil. Not speed, defiance, even at the end. The headlines call those accidents. The next set of files shows a slower kind of damage, the kind that hides behind charisma until the body simply stops pretending. Elizabeth Taylor's life was a looping battle with pain. Back operations, infections, scares that would have retired anyone without her stubbornness. The ending came dressed as congestive heart failure after years of repairs and close calls. In the final accounting, there's nothing theatrical about a heart that just can't push one more day. People wanted to believe she was invincible because she made invincible look fashionable. The file, like always, had no interest in illusions. It closed with a fact. Clark Gable's last months feel like a lesson delivered too late. Age was catching him. The pressures of a punishing shoot had worn him thin. He still insisted on doing too much, the way proud men do. After the first heart attack, he looked people in the eye and shrugged. After the second, there was no shrugging left. When a nation wept, it wasn't just for the actor. It was for the man who'd been playing strong so long he forgot to schedule room for being mortal. Frank Sinatra had the aura of a man who could talk down fate. The tux, the glass, the grin, the way rooms tilted toward him. But blood vessels don't bargain, and an artery doesn't care about charm. His final exit was a textbook lesson in how long loud living writes its own terms. There's a version of his story that ends with applause. The file ends with a heartbeat that didn't have another chorus. Paul Newman gave up cigarettes, then outlived the habit for years, only to face a disease whose damage doesn't check your calendar. Lung cancer. 2 words with an echo you can hear down the hallway. Fans clung to the eyes, the philanthropy, the quiet dignity of his last summers. The paperwork lists a cause and a date. The distance between those things is where grief lives. Humphrey Bogart wore a cigarette like a costume piece and paid for it like a bill that kept accruing interest. Esophageal cancer is a cruel collector. He fought, he tried surgery, he tried again. The voice that made 1,000 scenes crackle finally couldn't carry itself. There's a photo people share of Bogart leaning into a laugh mid-sentence. The note beside it might as well read, "This is what we chose to believe." The coroner's line says otherwise. Of course, tobacco and time weren't the only culprits. Sometimes the damage started young, disguised as work ethic and studio discipline. Judy Garland's story begins in a factory where dreams were built and teenagers were kept running like clockwork. The schedule didn't allow for being human, so chemistry filled the gaps. Something to wake you, something to keep you thin, something to shut you down in time for a 6 a.m. call. You don't build a system like that without someone breaking. Judy kept going anyway, an extraordinary voice carrying more weight than one life should. London was where the clock finally called in its debt. The inquest's phrase, "in cautious self-overdosage," sounds chilly. It was meant to be. But behind it was a truth everyone recognized. A girl raised on pills becomes a woman with a past she can't outrun. Ava Gardner's finale reads like winter. The body that once lit up a dozen cities dwindled to quiet rooms and accumulating diagnoses. Pneumonia doesn't care how many men once changed their lives for you. A lifetime of smoke adds its own signature to every breath. Old romances turn into foggy anecdotes. The myth stands tall in memory. The person begins to fold into blankets before the light goes out. If there's a moral here, it's simple and brutal. Legends don't grant credit toward immortality. They just make the obituary longer. While some paid for choices, others paid for geography, and the most dangerous thing on set wasn't a stunt or a script. John Wayne's name ends up in the center of that conversation because he's the biggest shadow in the frame, the cowboy who seemed forged from rock and sun. His diagnosis got folded into that grim tally, and suddenly cameras were pointed not at a sunset, but at a map with arrows and circles drawn across it. Did the dust do it? Did lifestyle? Did genetics add their own weight? The point isn't pretending to know the exact mixture. The point is noticing how many names showed up on the list at all. The image of Wayne as the unbreakable American man is too large to cancel. But place that silhouette against a desert where the air remembered things people tried to forget, and the myth looks different. Not all enemies arrive from the sky. Some live deep inside, slow and secret, while the face we know keeps smiling for the camera. Marlon Brando burned bright and then retreated, a planet pulling back its own light. Respiratory disease, with a stubborn fibrosis that tightens the lungs like a fist, paired with a heart that couldn't keep lending strength forever. People talk about the waistlines and the late-night eccentricities. The folder cares about scar tissue and oxygen saturation. It's a humbling translation. The most combustible actor of a century, gradually losing breath like a candle starved of air. He isn't the Godfather at the end. He's a man leaning hard into every inhale. Burt Lancaster had shoulders that made suits look like armor and a grin that could win a fistfight. Age taught him a slower vocabulary. Transient weakness, slurred moments, the kind of episodes you learn to hide with practiced charm. Strokes leave tracks. He had too many. By the time the last one arrived, the heroic profile had become a mask protecting a body that couldn't keep up with the image. It's not betrayal to say that out loud. It's respect. The legend was a man doing his best to stay upright until he couldn't. Rita Hayworth's case is the one that changed other people's futures. For years, her fading memory and unsteady speech were mislabeled as self-inflicted. The truth was a disease that erases names, rooms, and, eventually, selfhood. Early-onset Alzheimer's took her line by line, and by the time the diagnosis settled, the tabloids had already decided the lazier story. Her daughter fought that narrative with advocacy and research. If you know someone today who recognized their parents' illness sooner or found help faster, it might be because Rita's file corrected the world's vocabulary. She didn't destroy herself. An invisible thief moved in and stayed. We've opened a lot of folders. Before we close them, there's one more truth that ties them together. These endings rhyme. Some were sudden, metal, water, a heart that tore. Others were slow, lungs that stiffened, arteries that narrowed, a mind that dimmed. Across decades, the forces barely changed. Brutal schedules, image over honesty, quick fixes that turned into chains. The autopsy room cuts through myth. It lists what remains: scars, blockages, residues. Read that plainly and the patterns show. Judy, a teen trained to run on pills. Rita, mislabeled until Alzheimer's said the quiet part. McQueen, a last gamble when medicine said stop. Marilyn and Natalie, mystery that deserves restraint, not monsters. Newman, Bogart, Sinatra, Ava, Gable, habits that went from style to sentence. Memory edits, posters aren't lies, they're incomplete. The rebel was vulnerable. The queen hurt daily. The cowboy carried dust that didn't care about legend. The titan who whispered thunder measured breath at the end. The talent was real. So were the costs. That's why these files return. Not for shock, but for clarity. Hold both truths at once, the legend and the person. Honor the work by seeing the whole life. Which chapter hit you hardest? The mysteries, the desert tally, the silent illnesses, or the habits that became a trap? Drop it below, and if you want more clean, fast deep dives, hit subscribe. The next envelope is already on the desk.